All right, folks, we have another very interesting person that we're getting to talk to at the moment. This is a friend of mine named Spiritman that I've interacted with a couple of times. I first met them on a open panel that we had. They came on. They had a couple of things they wanted to share with us. Good friend of mine, Saxon, had a chat with them, and by Job, I figured we'd better introduce them to the rest of you folks and get to know them myself a little bit better. So, Spirit Man, it is an absolute pleasure to meet you. What brings you to the Twitch politics space, so to speak?
Peaceful revolution and a new world spirit. Short and sweet.
Very interesting. A peaceful revolution and a. What was the second part?
A new world spirit.
A new world spirit. Very good. Could you elucidate a little bit further on what exactly you mean with these terms?
Yes, I thought I would get your reaction first before I unpack, because I don't know which way you want to take it. But there's a lot to say. But I'll kind of give the Cole's notes that I'm currently on a bit of a journey. That's kind of been a journey in progress. About 20-some years ago, I decided I want to try and create a peaceful revolution or a spiritual scientific paradigm shift to sort of address poverty, oppression, all the stuff that is not ideal in the world. And now, about 74,000 hours later, I came across a philosopher named Hegel who really made this vision possible. Because I tried all these other approaches, and none of them seemed to be working. And so I decided to do a 3,000-hour deep dive into his philosophy and read him directly. And that doesn't sound like something very, not much of an accomplishment. But if you've ever read Hegel directly, you get an impression very quickly that how he writes is not normal. It's actually excruciatingly difficult to understand what he's saying. And there's one book in particular that he wrote. It's considered a masterpiece, but it's called The Science of Logic, and it's supposed to be the most difficult text ever written by a human being. And so I studied that for 3,000 hours, and it was extremely agonizing. And when I got to the end of these 3,000 hours, something kind of miraculous happened, and I started to understand what he was saying. I broke through what was normally called meaningless verbiage. It's so dense, it doesn't seem to make any sense to anybody over the last 200 years. Hegel died 200 years ago, and to this day, nobody truly claims to understand what he says. But I think I'm one of the first people that did my homework and actually broke through the first stage. And I'm trying to reorientate people to his true understanding, because in it, I think, lies the answer to a lot of our world problems in a profoundly wise way that's missing today. I think a peaceful revolution is only possible with this kind of universal wisdom that only he proposes, but has been talked about in sensuous form for thousands of years in religious consciousness, mysticism, things that are not generally scientific or respected in modern society. But Hegel does put it in scientific form, and he's sublating, or he's bringing together impossible opposites that are warring in the world today. He puts them in this harmonious scientific system, which he calls infinite science. And he also calls it genuine philosophy. Today, we don't have genuine philosophy. I think what we need to do as part of this peaceful revolution is teach three things. And I'll just do a really quick recap of it, and then you can pick up where you want to go, depending what you think Twitch wants to hear. But the first part of the peaceful revolution is the culture part. If you don't have a strong culture, and a culture that actually is wise, then you end up doing the opposite of what you intend to do. If you want to change the world changes you. If you want to do good, it twists you into your opposite. You end up doing bad. All these types of things are called dialectical phenomena. But Hegel teaches us how to engage with this sort of speculative irony in a speculative way that sublates or overcomes that. And you can actually be wise in a confusing world. Once that is taught, and we have a wise culture, we're going to create an app called WEWA. It stands for the Worldwide Essential Workers App, and it's a global, worker-owned, cooperative social enterprise app. And it's going to be how we employ people in the future, sort of like how Uber does it, except in a different spirit where everybody's infinitely valuable and we share through a new dividend that's tied to production and inflation. That's the short version. There's a lot more to it. But the last part has to do with this incredible technology called CRISPR. And CRISPR is this, it's moving so fast, this disruptive technology in genetic editing, where it's becoming possible to create designer babies. We're basically going to cure 75,000 human diseases in probably the next 10 to 20 years. And we have to make sure that this incredible power is under a higher spirit and a higher wisdom, so that we wield that incredible godlike power in a way where we'll improve ourselves and not stratify ourselves or create a sort of species situation that is not very ideal for most of humanity. So that's kind of where we're starting. And I got a bunch of Twitch streams and I think I have 6 live feeds up now. But we're trying to build the movement with people who understand that kind of wisdom or want it and might be interested in joining the team and taking the wisdom quiz. So I'll let you have at it. Where do you want to start with that?
Very interesting, very interesting. And what sort of action do you think you need to take to bring about this change that you're hoping to see?
The first thing is we have to teach Hegel and get people interested in studying him, because for the last 200 years, he's been taught in a fractured, schizophrenic kind of way. When he was alive, he was able to hold opposites together. So in society, back in the 1800s, there was the very religious camp, and then there was the more, people were butting up through the French Revolution, and they're trying to separate church and state and get to real reason. And they're called when he died, though, these two factions that he was uniting did exactly what he said not to do, and they dialectically split apart and started warring with each other. So you had these right Hegelians and these left Hegelians for the last 200 years. And we have another version of that starting up as new scholars are starting to realize that Hegel has something to say again. But of course, they're teaching him in this one-sided way that's not the full breadth of his incredible insight. He says you can resolve contradictions if you think about things in the right order. And I have that order grasped in its beginning form now. So I'm trying to, as this new revolution in Hegel is coming onto the scholarly scene, I want to sort of prevent us from repeating history and directing the true education, and then restructuring all of the scientific enterprise around what he calls his Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, which he claims is the sum total of all human knowledge in basically 4 books. And when I read that, I didn't believe it at first, but now I do. I actually think we need this kind of science running our educational systems today. And then on top of that, once we get people looking at Hegel the right way and start tarrying with him and learning and thinking this is worth studying, there's a wisdom quiz that we're calling it. This wisdom quiz is based on teaching people how to hold opposites in contradiction in their minds and then sublating them. And I think the single greatest piece of this logic, of this whole encyclopedia, if we can only teach one thing, I think we need to teach what sublation is, because it is the living essence of wisdom itself. That's the key thing that is missing in 200 countries and 7,000 languages across the planet right now, and why we're warring with each other and can barely get through a pandemic. Actually, most countries haven't even gotten through the pandemic. We're just lucky to be in developed countries that, we're sort of coming out of it now. But I think that we need to get people understanding the real Hegel and getting people understanding sublation through the wisdom quiz as an absolute first start. Or if they want to come in some other place, we get them to realize the importance of that as the first step.
Interesting. So the goal is to encourage people to take this test to promote higher understanding, or to encourage people to participate in the movement? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So I actually ran a group for 10 years where I tried to build these kind of high-performance teams. And these high-performance teams were sort of with this organization called Make Poverty History. And I was doing it at the University of Alberta here in Canada. And I was able to recruit these amazing students, like, the cream of the crop, the smartest, the least traumatized in a lot of cases, just amazing, pure-hearted people. And we still couldn't keep a team together after like 10 years. after 10 years, I was able to get teams of 66 people organized, but it wasn't something that was world changing. Like just getting 66 students working over a year during midterms and stuff was a feat, but it wasn't enough to change the world. And so I discovered that there's something that we need to understand fundamentally about ourselves before a team can actually become genuinely stable and wise. And this wisdom quiz is an attempt to solve that. Because most people, when we're moving through the world, we're doing this universal logic by accident. There's actually this like super sensuous logic that's animating the world. We call it the laws of nature, all this kind of stuff, laws of consciousness and psychology. But when you're stuck in ordinary thinking, Hegel calls it, you're performing a logical move called negation, abstract negation, where when you're thinking, you're performing this abstract negation over and over and over again as consciousness. It's kind of like a bad infinite. And it creates otherness explicitly. It creates otherness. And then there's something else called sublation, which is the opposite, which is a reintegration back into yourself. It's a return. But the return in our current culture is accidental. It's not explicit. So if you don't know explicitly how to do sublation, what do? By default, you do negation. So whenever we meet somebody we don't know, we just automatically start negating things unless they're part of our groupthink. And so teaching this sublation through the wisdom quiz creates a way of thinking together that's not groupthink. It allows the first negation to happen so you can still be critical. But it's a wise criticalness that then can be negated into a return as a self-determining moment. So there's no cult here. It's actually everybody's empowered to think for themselves, but they do it through negation and sublation. And that's what creates an anti-fragile team that can withstand this dialectical tension that rips people apart from the inside out, because it's literally the nature of our pure thought. It is the essence of what human beings are as thinking creatures of reason. So I think that a supercharged way to teach people this living essence of wisdom is by doing this quiz so that we can build a team. And then once the team has 10 people that know how to sublate, I think we're going to experience an exponential increase, because there's no negations that will rip the team apart, because everybody's wise enough to start sublating all the pain and the contradictions and the disorder in every culture, in every society, in every language, in every philosophical system since the dawn of philosophy itself 3,000 years ago, according to Hegel. So yes, I think that starting with this is a very powerful way to get people into the movement and making sure that we're building real teams where you have a real sense of friendship. We don't really have genuine friendship either. We have abstract philosophy and we have abstract friendship, which is why it feels so brittle and fragile, and everybody feels lonely despite being hyper-connected on platforms like Twitch and the internet. So I think that sublation and this universal logic is the beginning of that solution to build a really wise movement. And I think that has to be the beginning point.
Interesting. So we're hopefully encouraging people to participate in the test, which will give them essentially a role in the movement, and then we can build a community around the desire to participate in this change that is obviously idyllic on essentially a universal level.
Yeah, and by ideal, we don't just mean it in a naive sense that it's in our heads only. We're shooting for utopia. Hegel wasn't necessarily for naive utopia. He was actually taught as a negative philosopher over the last 200 years because he's famous for emphasizing the fact that you can't get rid of that first negation. And a lot of people who are more naive and want to be in bliss and just pretend like everything is good in the world and everything will go fine. He's saying, no, that's naive. The world operates by negation and then the negation of negation. And he says a real philosopher actually doesn't run away from the negation. They go into it and then they find the truth that's lying behind it. And that's how you actually transcend this bad infinite, that's this repeating cycle, into a genuine infinite. And most people don't know what a genuine infinite is because they don't know that there's two infinites. So this is the radical clarity that Hegel provides people so they can start thinking clearly and overcoming this sort of stratification that's happening. But yes, it's kind of a way to encourage people to create this worldwide movement without being naive, but without being super negative and pessimistic either. So we're actually changing this interpretation of what Hegel calls the slaughter bench of history, where history for the past, thousands of years has been operating by this painful negation through wars and human suffering as the idea. The idea works itself through nature. And so, if we want to overcome that, not repeat this sort of terrible past, this painful past, we have to understand what Hegel is really saying. And nobody really has, which is why Hegel is still considered a negative philosopher. What I found after studying him for about I think it started happening about 1,500, 2,000 hours in, is that there's an inflection point that happens. Yes, the beginning of history is very brutal. It is this kind of slaughter bench of history where people don't know how to think wisely. And even our best religious teachers weren't understood well enough to actually overcome that. But once we start developing this higher level of reasoning, it turns into what he calls the notion, and the notion starts to sublate faster and faster and faster all these negations. And he says this is what real science is. It's more peaceful, but the ideal state, the ideal universal state, belongs to this higher spirit of wisdom. And he says that your citizens have to grasp this inflection point to break out of the slaughter bench, or else it'll catch them by surprise. And so what we're teaching is this wiser way to engage with your other, but see yourself in your other, and then sublate into a higher understanding over and over and over again as part of the ideal process. And that this is what science is supposed to do, is instead of having wars where thousands of people die just to uncover an idea, now you know how to engage with ideas directly through this infinite scientific process where we just do experiments to find out and decide things. And that's a heck of a lot more peaceful in terms of a global culture of truth finding. And right now, the reason why it's not happening, even though we have modern science, is that Hegel calls our current sciences finite sciences. They're dead science way. He says they're actually existing in fragments when really they belong to one universal logic. But the one universal logic doesn't seem to make sense to anybody. That's why we operate in seemingly different logics: physics logic, biology logic, chemistry logic, psychology logic. But he says actually he found the way to make one logic do them all in different forms and connect them all as one science. And that's what his encyclopedia is. And the new state, the whole global, we don't really want to create a new world order. We want to create a new world spirit based off of this new way of knowledge. And that when we sublate things, we're just adding it to this sum total of human knowledge in a kind of Wikipedia model, but not in the fragmentedness of Wikipedia. We're going to try and reorder it in the true nature of what philosophy is supposed to be as a concrete whole. So I think that if we teach this, we will have an ideal movement, but it's absolute idealism, which is not this naive sort of subjective idealism, which is in opposition to realism. Hegel is as much of a realist as he was this subjective idealist. He sublated that opposition, and that's what real wise idealism is. You make everything ideal wisely.
Interesting. So, again, I'm kind of maybe a little bit baffled as far as the action plan. We take a test. We begin to participate in the movement. How do we bring about the change that enables society to take this new shape and form? Like, what is the next conceivable step, theoretically, if someone were to decide that this is the thing that should happen? What is the next thing that needs to be done?
So these are great questions, and it's got to be a pretty smooth process. So the first thing is, before people take the wisdom quiz, they're allowed to negate it. So what happens is, because people don't know how to sublate, they just cancel, right? And so we want them to not take everything hook, line, and sinker. They're allowed to say, I don't like this quiz, I don't like this, that, and the other. And we sort of have to justify why there's a good reason behind it. And we want to promote critical thinking. We want to promote self-determination, because that's an essential part to realizing this kind of higher spirit for every single person. But once people get over that moment and they take the quiz and they get 100% on it, so you can't get into the organization unless you sublate 26 dialectics that are what we call the apocalypses. They are these really volatile dialectics, these contradictions in current society, what we call our epoch, right? So we call them epoch-ellipses, because if you don't know how to sublate it, then when you meet your opposite, you're going to explode with them, and the team is going to rip apart. And you're going to spend a lot of team resources just trying to heal things than actually getting things done in a highly productive manner or highly efficacious manner. So once people master the wisdom quiz, there's 26 starting dialectics that are really hard to sublate. But once we show people they are sublatable, it actually forms the beginning of a new education system for them. Because the world isn't just made of 26 opposite pairs. Hegel actually shows that there's over 200 in just his system alone. And so we're going to get people to understand this order and this sublation pattern as this master class. So once you finish the wisdom quiz, it's just the beginning of getting this new education system started where everybody's allowed to self-determine and increase their wisdom. So their wisdom score kind of keeps increasing as they sublate these dialectics that are messed up or conflated in the modern education system. Hegel was 10 times more clear, and he can resolve contradictions that are impossible today. Like, what's the relationship between religion and philosophy? What's the relationship between philosophy and religion? What's the relationship between art and philosophy, or art and religion, or art and the state? These things are not in an order, and most people think, well, how do you order those? That doesn't make any sense. But Hegel says, yes, if you want to be a genuinely rational thinker, our thoughts actually grow in a certain order. And it sounds really incredible, but it's kind of like a plant. Everything moves in this sublation pattern. Once we get people understanding this is the hard thing to think about. They become real scientists because we question our presuppositions on a whole new level. Once they grasp this, then we say, okay, if you want to start learning Hegel directly, which is a larger study, then people can do that on their own. And we have a document where we can assign people one-on-one sessions to do tutoring, which is what real education is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be like this Platonic, Socratic back and forth where every student feels important and their education is very valuable, rather than a cog in the machine where you just learn a fraction of what you need to so you can be a cog in some kind of system. So we're going to reinvigorate the living process of learning in almost a one-on-one basis. And then we're going to say, now that you understand how to sublate and you know how to build genuine friendships, then you can get into a life orientation where we say to somebody, okay, maybe you don't have time to study philosophy or Hegel or put time into this thing we call the synchronicity document. The synchronicity document is this document where we're taking the sum total of 3,000 years of philosophers and we're putting them in columns. And then we're saying, here's what they all have in common, and showing that we're all saying the same thing with different words. And it's all in this order that Hegel kind of shows us, because he studied them and put them into this order that I think is correct. And so once we get to know you, we go into these things called 11 life areas. And we say, human beings need a comprehensive healthcare system where they're not treated in Band-Aid solutions, but it's like, well, you go to the hospital and you sew up some kind of damage, but you don't solve the damage at home or the societal damage or the anxiety or whatever that's being caused in all the other life areas. But truly, we need to get people understanding and supported in terms of their physical health, mental health, academic health, their spiritual health, family, friends, intimacy, politics, finances, hygiene and style, practical things, and then dream goals and purpose. If even one of those is not doing well, it actually ruins your happiness for all the others, even if they're doing well. So once we get to know people and we say, hey, look, if you trust us and we trust you because we're allowed to think for ourselves, then we find out, okay, how is society oppressing you? How is the rest of your network not supporting you? And then try and find a way to get people on this more wise way of living, to create more time, to give to this wisdom process. And then once they're done that, then they can start working in this WeWa app and say, okay, well, you can't volunteer forever. Like, we're realistic. Somehow we're going to have to pay people to be self-sustainable in this new model. And so we're going to say, what are your talents and skills? And we're going to do this thing called dialectical matching, where we get to know somebody's talents and match them with jobs in a quick way so that they're actually doing something that puts them into flow state. And flow state is sort of the whole purpose of life. It's this, when you get really good at wisdom, you start belonging in the world. And I think that this app can do a really great job doing that instead of what's currently happening, that our apps are sort of spying on us and then selling our data to the highest bidder so that we work for less. We want to change the spirit of that. And so once people understand how to create resilient friendships and they have this seed of compassion in a logical way, not just an intuitive, faithful way, which is important, but it's only the beginning. You're supposed to build it into a thinking compassion and then carry that with you into your work. And I think once we start doing work in this way and we start getting flow states, there's a counterintuitive thing that happens, that when you treat human beings like human beings, they actually live better and they work better and they're more fulfilled. And they did studies on this where if you put somebody into flow state or they put themselves into flow state, their productivity doesn't go down. The investment you make in them, if you do it right and you hit that sweet spot of flow state rather than anxiety and working so hard that you get into arousal, or you underwork and you get into apathy or boredom, if you hit that sweet spot, productivity goes up by up to 700%. So you actually become more competitive than even the most draconian competitive global transnationals, perhaps, that are just seeking profit. And so I think if we make a global app like this and move into all the industries that are currently being exploited by global companies that are unregulated and exploiting tax loopholes and causing an incredible wealth concentration like we've never seen on the global scale before, I think we can create a new labor model where we can pay people $90,000 a year, which is the estimated optimal, and then use this kind of wisdom to address challenges that come along in a way where we don't rip apart because of the dialectic, but as soon as we see a challenge, we work together to sublate because we all understand this universal logic. So that's sort of the next step, to go from the education process of self-thinking to actually doing something practical with that wisdom.
Interesting. So there is some level of almost, I don't want to call it like job placement that goes into this, but there is definitely like a sense of finding where an individual is going to be the most productive and kind of sending them in this sort of direction as a result of not necessarily the result of the test, but completion of the course that is measured by this progressive test. Is that more correct?
Kind of, yeah. It's like you start off and we say, okay, you're not going to have time to sublate. There's thousands of dialectics in the world creating tension, right? We're not going to have time to sublate them all in every single person and then do action. So we kind of have to do a compromise. We say, okay, you just have to grasp the pattern for yourself. You can't be indoctrinated. You can't be relying on an external source. You have to do it yourself. Because if you don't become a self-thinking philosopher, that down the road, eventually there will be a negation that sort of activates you and triggers you, and then you just become very neurotic and unstable. And we want people to have that security in themselves. We don't want them to rely on the app. We don't want them to rely on anything except their own capacity to think and this logic and to critique it for themselves. So we say once you grasp the pattern of that on 26 major ones, it is possible to continue on your own at your own pace and continue this sort of like education while we're educating you on the next processes of the peaceful revolution. So they can be doing this on their own and improving their wisdom as they learn more about, getting their life areas taken care of, which is just self-growth, right? Human beings think they want happiness, but the reality is they actually don't. Most people, when you ask them, well, what's the thing all human beings want more than anything? They'll say happiness, or making money, or power, sex, status. But the reality is that it's this flow state, because you don't have to be happy to be in flow. Usually you're actually in a challenging task and it's challenging you, but you like it because you're expressing yourself and you're growing through that challenge in a way that's meaningful to you. And even though you might not be like pleasant or like euphorically happy, it's a meaningful experience. And so that meaningfulness is really what we want in our core. And of course, that results in happiness after, but while you're going through it, it can be challenging. And that's why it's more resilient than just happiness itself, which comes and goes. And so when we get the life areas on that level, then we have like stability with theoretical wisdom. And then we have stability in the practical life areas to support that person to continue that wisdom process. And then we get them to say, okay, it is a placement app, but the app is letting you do that for yourself. Because Hegel says, if you don't do that, you end up in Plato's Republic. And he criticizes Plato, even though he loves Plato, for saying that he was too universal. The state was too powerful, where the guardians got to dictate what people did. And when you dictate to somebody what they're supposed to do, you lose some kind of spirit in you. There's a dignity loss. So even though we do know people's skill sets, we let them engage with the app the way they want to, and then they just get guidance, and then they still have the freedom to choose. If they don't want to follow what the app says, they can still go down a different route, and it might be painful, but at least it preserves this essential moment of spirit that you get to determine it for yourself. Self-determination in this whole is absolutely critical. And when people try to do this in utopic movements, they usually ignore one or the other, and it falls apart in either anarchy or in totalitarianism. And Hegel is accused of being a totalitarian because he advocates the whole. But when you read the whole system, he's incredibly balanced and he does it all. He says, you as an individual have a duty to the state, but the state has a duty to you too. And if you don't recognize yourself in the laws of the state, they don't belong to you. You can't have this higher spirit. You're going to have some kind of negation. So that's why we spend a lot of time allowing people to develop their own wisdom and understand that that's part of the process. Because when they start working together in the system, we still allow them that freedom to try and actualize their wisdom for themselves. And it's this perfect synthesis between opposites of anarchy, of what he calls abstract freedom, and this sort of universal state that we have everybody working together with these laws that protect all of us, right? He says genuine freedom is not this radical, do whatever you want. He says that has an element that has to be preserved, but that's in opposition to necessity, to determination, to law, right? And he says the real freedom comes from the sublation, the transcendence of these two. There's a freedom from freedom and necessity itself. This is genuine freedom. And this is what destiny is. Destiny is when you actualize your highest potential, your necessity, with your own caprice. So that's what we want to preserve, to get feelings of destiny when people go into the placement app. But what you're getting placed into is your own self-determined destiny through the process of labor, which is supposed to be the spiritual process of self-actualization. Marx tried to talk about this, but Marx didn't finish it and didn't understand Hegel enough to grasp that spiritual scientific part of it. We're going to do it the right way and use an app that they didn't have 200 years ago that makes it actually realistic to do this immense coordination in real time. And that will make flow states a lot more resilient to get that productivity and that abundance flowing in a wise way, and not just this sort of indeterminate, naive, utopic way that people have tried in the past and failed.
Okay, interesting. How much development has gone into this at this point? What sort of shape is this in? Is there an app that has been developed? Is the test been developed? How much of this do we have so far in reality?
It's still fairly early, but I do have enough of the system set up to get people started, to start building the team. So the wisdom quiz went through about 4 or 5 iterations. And we got some critical feedback, and people didn't like certain parts of it. So we've improved it now, where it's more appropriate, I think, for the greater audience. That's not just philosophers. But there's 3 parts to it, and that's ready to take. I can send that to you or whoever wants to take it. And then you go through it, and if you like it, okay, great. You can continue on. If you don't like it, then you don't have to join anything. It's totally voluntary. That's an essential point of it, because we want to educate people how to recognize high-performance organizations from actual cults or these oppressive organization cultures that are exploitive. So that's part of the education process, to protect yourselves through self-thinking and self-wisdom while you're engaging with this external philosopher called Hegel. So that quiz is good to go, and we have a marking template and a coordination system now. It's early, but it works. So far, nobody's passed the wisdom quiz. So that's why I'm still doing a lot of this by myself. But once the first person or a couple of people pass, That's the only meritocratic principle that will work to create a higher spirit. Because if you say, oh, meritocracy, we need to make a meritocracy, it doesn't really work because there's a whole bunch of privileges that are invisible that aren't being factored in. That when you say work hard or do well in school or whatever, it actually just leads to high IQ individuals with better families and better opportunities rising to the top and sort of having what's called a virtuous economic cycle spiral up, whereas those that don't have a vicious economic cycle spiral down. And so, what we need to do is create a real meritocracy that accounts for that. And the only thing that we think people need to be amazing at to have power in this new structure is the better you are at sublating, the more power you're trusted with, because it's the only thing that creates harmony from negations. So that just guarantees that it's basically wise love. And people say, be love, 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 love. Well, what does that mean? Now we know what it means. It means self-recognition through the sublative process, which is universal. That's what we start teaching with the wisdom quiz. But that's the only principle that we use to say who gets power in the peaceful revolution. And I think it's brilliant. I think it's the piece that's missing, because everybody else who's tried to do anything else end up in some kind of weird situation where privilege just accumulates again. So that's built. The life area coaching, that's in its nascent forms. We're starting to build the support saying, okay, if you need food, how do we help you where you are? If you need mental health support or therapy or some kind of trauma support, how do we help you? If you need academic support, well, we'll teach you Hegel for free, no problem. The videos are online. We'll do this coaching thing. We're just outlining the actual resource supports now. And then with the WeWa app, I actually did a hunger strike about 6 months ago, and we raised $18,000. And we're on Upwork trying to hire people right now to program it. And I got about 4 or 5 proposals, but we don't want to hire anybody that hasn't passed the wisdom quiz. So I passed the first version of it to the programmers, and they're shocked, right? Like just let us do the work. But they don't understand that every single person, from the janitor sweeping the floor to whoever runs the peaceful revolution, every single person is spiritually equal. Materially, we can be different, right? We're not having what Hegel calls an abstract equality where everybody gets the same materially. People who are taller and bigger need to eat more food, right? So there's going to be a diversity in the materiality, but spiritually, there's this equality going on. And so the programmers didn't understand this quiz. So we haven't hired anybody yet because nobody's passed it. So I'm looking for programmers that will be open to the philosophical purpose of why we're doing the sublation, to hold the team together at all levels. And the first one that passes the wisdom quiz we'll just hand the 18,000 over and just say, use your expertise and do the best you can, because we will have vetted them sort of through their dialectics on the Upwork to know that they have the skills. And then once they have the wisdom, that's sort of a very potent combination. So I started coding the app by myself because I wanted to make sure the technology was open source. And so we don't want to rely on any other architecture, because then you sort of get sucked in rather than sublating. And so we're using JavaScript on the front end, the back end, and we're using Redis and a whole bunch of open source tools. And I figured out that you can use a routing map that Uber first used that is also open source. We can make the whole thing for free. We just need people that are inspired and have the spirit come out of them. And so once we have that happen, we'll hire the programmers to pick up the technology stack that I started building with, and then off to the races. So that's what we've done so far in terms of those 2 steps. In terms of, we actually have 30,000 people in a Facebook group for the WeWa app too, because I spend a couple thousand advertising on Facebook. And so there's like tens of thousands of people, mostly in India, that we have not utilized yet, haven't really reached out to yet, because we don't have the capacity. But it's all kind of sitting there, getting ready to be activated, and then sort of get the app working towards CRISPR, and then starting our own CRISPR labs, which is probably the least developed part of it. But that's sort of where we're at the moment.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So it sounds like it is definitely quite a barrier to entry. I'd imagine that there are a number of people. I know that there are a lot of developers that are located in India. I'm surprised if you have a relatively large user base that you haven't been able to locate someone with the skills necessary among some of the people that you might have interacted with.
Exactly. And what I discovered is that there's something strange going on with Facebook. I still like Mark Zuckerberg. I think he's actually protecting us because it could be a heck of a lot worse. I did work for Uber for a couple of years, and trust me, there's a different spirit going on. And I think Facebook is in this system of hyper competition where they're just doing what they need to do to stay on top. Because if they're not on top, something else will that won't care about protecting people. Even though all our data is being sold, it's kind of it's necessary at this point, even though it's not ideal. So I actually paid thousands of dollars to do advertising on Facebook because I was told it worked. But as soon as I stopped paying money, it's like those 30,000 people just stopped. It's like not a single like has happened since. And I'm like, how did that happen? Why isn't there people talking about this if they've clicked like? So there's something going on with the Facebook algorithm where I spent a lot of money and it didn't create a critical mass. It didn't even continue the growth. And then we kind of found out later that I was actually going to all these golf courses around my city. I went to like, I don't know, 28 of them. And I was sort of doing this sort of like peaceful protest out there trying to get the wealthy on board as sort of our guardians in a certain way. And there was a road construction crew outside of one of them. And he came and said, I love what you're doing, because there's a lot of, blue collar workers kind of like me who are really realizing something's not right in the world. And so they came up to me and said, we love your message. Like the whole crew was just like, we love what you're doing. So please tell me your website, blah, blah, blah. And so I told them, and then he was the foreman. He went off and, driving down the road, and then like about half an hour later, he comes back and says, hey, I tried your Facebook and everything. It's like, nothing's popping up. I'm like, did you type the name exactly? And he said, yeah. So he gave me his phone and I typed in the name of my Facebook group exactly, and it didn't pop up. And I was like, what? So is Facebook, when you start paying lots of money, do they actually restrict your advertising organically to kind of get you to keep paying? And so I did a little bit of an experiment. I just stopped paying to see if the growth would continue, and it didn't. So now I don't know if those are fake people or if there are people that are even getting our messages or what is happening. But I got a couple of warnings on my Facebook group, and there's all these restrictions now, and you're not even really sure what you're paying for. But I did get a couple of Facebook like marketers coming to help me, and they didn't really like, they were trying to get more engagement, but it didn't feel quite, something felt a little bit strange. So I want to learn what happened there before we spend a lot of money again. But you're right. I thought I would have triggered at least people that would be like, I want to, it was in India. They're some of the most marginalized. So I thought they would be very passionate about this, which is why if you go to our YouTube channel, Spirit Peaceful Revolution, our main video was actually made by a couple of Indian women who did in the beginning find out about us and were inspired. So there's something going on that's unusual there. And we're still looking for those programmers. So that's a great question. Yeah, now, and people in my network could always access it, but it's almost like if somebody's outside of your bubble, there's like some kind of algorithm thing that's trying to shift attention around, it feels like. Because people in my network, they would show me their phone and say, oh, it's popping up. But like it was such a random occurrence that I went to this golf course that was completely out of my normal path, right? So all the algorithms couldn't predict that I was going to end up at this random golf course. And then the foreman, who I totally didn't know, I probably was like 6 degrees of separation away from, he tried accessing, and then it came clear that, oh, it's not actually reaching the world. These Facebook groups aren't actually viewable by the whole world. So there's something going on with the algorithm. And it was actually an incredible learning experience. The whole journey has been a sort of, you don't really know how tight things are in terms of the system you're in until you start challenging them, right? So I think that we are, okay, I don't want to be, I want to kind of stay positive, but I'll say something that's a credible source. I really love in Canada something called the Massey Lectures. There's some of them, they get these really great scholars in who do a lot of peer-reviewed research. And this one guy came on there and he said, he's a scholar. He's talking in like really professional tone and, like very good research. And out of nowhere, he starts talking about this digital revolution stuff. And he says, hey guys, just letting you know, even the researchers are concerned about what's happening. He says, we're actually being corralled like cattle by these invisible pens that you can't see. He says they're being built right now. So he says, you need to start paying attention. And it was such an incredible difference between this professional sort of like, everything's okay, we're doing good research, to like, whoa, there's a huge problem going on. It was kind of jarring because, this Massey lecture stuff is really politically correct and really sort of sanitized. And for him to have the confidence to say that and to such a big audience was really sort of a wake-up call to me that what I was experiencing was the same thing. And the system is the problem. We shouldn't be blaming the people. We're all kind of trapped in this. That's why we need to create our own app that is about self-determination and a greater liberation with this wisdom. So I am looking for a way to build a network organically to kind of get outside of this corral. And that's why I'm going to unconventional places like Twitch. I found out about Twitch because people saw me on YouTube, and then told me about Discord. And then on Discord, they told me about Twitch. And then Twitch kind of led me back to you guys on Discord. So it's very organic. And we have to sort of build this network one person at a time to sort of get the kind of core going. And then from that, it sort of starts, one person talks to another person, and we start going exponential that way. So that's my new strategy, because I did do exactly what you said, and I was surprised by what happened. I spent a lot of money.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a big issue. It sounds like something very questionable went on with Facebook in particular, that I think that you should probably try to get to the bottom of, figure out who ended up with that money, how that money ended up somewhere, find out why your information isn't getting out to the people that you're expecting it to. But another thing is, I would always encourage everybody to branch out to as many possible platforms as you can, because sticking to just Twitch or just YouTube, you're not going to reach as many people as you can. I'd say you need a Snapchat, you need an Instagram, you need a TikTok, you need a Twitter, you need everything, and to have everything kind of pointing back into the same direction, or at one another, to try to build everything as much as possible. And then as far as spending money on advertising, there are ways to do it, but you definitely need to make sure that you understand exactly what you're getting for your money.
Well said. And I did try and do my homework. We had like, I'm not very comfortable with targeted advertising, but I learned the system, and there's a pixel thing that you can do where you can track people and all this stuff. And I left that pixel off because I felt like it was too invasive. So we tried to be as targeting as we could without that extra knowledge. And there's actually people who are Facebook experts that did come to me and offer their volunteer support and say, hey, we're gurus, we're amazing at this, we do it for our own company, we will help you. And they said, we want that pixel data. And I'm like, oh no. I said, that's the only thing I didn't turn on. And they said, no, that's the treasure trove. Like, that's where you get into people's heads and you know exactly what they want and their subconscious. I'm like, no, that's the thing that we don't want to do. Like, that's the thing that, in order to continue building trust with people, we can't use that easy, low-hanging fruit. And so they weren't even able to help me. So like, we're kind of stuck in this, if you have a lot of integrity, you're sort of stuck in this double bind, which is why it's so hard to grow in this kind of system. That's why I'm literally going to the philosophers and the people that sort of are looking for wisdom and saying, do you understand this message and how difficult it is? It's worth doing. And I'll teach Hegel. I did all this kind of hard work already, and I'm willing to teach it for free just because I think we need a higher spirit. And if we have that, I think we can start doing this organically the way it's probably supposed to happen. But we'll stay on Facebook, we'll stay on the platforms because they are needed to start that global movement fast enough to sort of be realistic. So I still love Facebook. I just think that when you spend money on it, you get into a whole nother game. And that game is doing this right now, wealth concentration like we've never seen before. So unless you have millions of dollars or something like that, I don't know if you can really compete. I tried to get on TikTok, but you need like 1,000 followers. And I tried to do Reddit, and you need like 500 followers. It was like only Twitch and Discord and YouTube kind of let you get in on the ground floor, right? So if you guys have any other suggestions, as a matter of fact, this session right now is on Twitch, it's on YouTube, it's on Discord, it's on Zoom, and it's on my phone. and it's on Facebook Live. So I 100% am taking and heeding your advice, somebody. So if you guys have any other suggestions, yes, I am definitely trying to be as wise as I can about this. And any help would be fantastic. Instagram gurus, wide open.
You always hear rumors about that guy that did the knowledge thing with the Lamborghinis in his car in the garage, that he made a decent amount of money with those ads on YouTube. And I don't, again, know if it would be positive to do such a thing. But again, there are so many different places that are doing marketing and advertising that at the end of the day all point back to Google, Facebook, and a couple other people that are, really in the market unless you get into television marketing.
Yeah, pretty much. And not like we're against the man. Everybody in this peaceful revolution has to be essential. Even the people at the top are stuck in the system. So we really have to focus on changing the system, the spirit of it. But yeah, I was thinking about trying to do those advertisements, but I actually took a different approach here. And over the last couple of months, I was inspired by this guy on meetup.com. One of my Russian friends kind of came to me, and she's a philosopher. And she says, you have to go to these big philosophy meetup groups. They're actually meeting in videos, and like you can chat with them and tell them the real interpretation of Hegel. And there was an Oxford scholar there teaching Hegel for free on these meetup groups. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. So I went there to see if he was teaching it the same way I was. And he inspired me to start my own series and provide value on YouTube so that people can kind of come and learn on their own and not have to do this advertising. And I made about 38 of them now, and about 20, I think 23 of them are online in a playlist that you can watch. And they're called the 38 Sessions of Spirit. And they basically explain Hegel in a bunch of different contexts that might appeal to people who are looking for wisdom. So if you love Descartes, if you like Wittgenstein, if you are into Eckhart Tolle and New Age, if you are into like flow state and humor, what about if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you're religious in general, all these different areas, Hegel sublated them, and he makes people feel ideal in this right order. So I spent many hours making these 1 hour sessions so people can take it in bite-sized places, like bite-sized portions. And then that actually has been growing a lot. Actually, we just got like 400 views in the last 2 days. So it might have actually started reaching critical mass because we actually figured out that Hegel proved God exists through the ontological proof through an atheistic perspective, which is very strange that he's taken an atheistic perspective and proving what religion has been saying is true for a long time. So it's this weird sublation where you're getting the opposites reconciled. And I think only Hegel has ever done this because it takes that profound level of thinking. And so I actually made that talk 2 days ago where I explain where to find that and how to interpret it. So that video might be taking off because it is really incredible. It's truly never been seen before. Hegel is a gem that has not been discovered, has not been fully discovered in the last 200 years. So it's really, I hope they're really valuable, these videos, these sessions of spirit, to sort of help us get the word out and overcome this problem. So we're doing our best.
That's fantastic. How long have you been working at this particular goal?
The spiritual paradigm shift for about 70,000 hours, 74,000, but this iteration of it has been in the works since the beginning of the pandemic, so about 2 years now. And we raised the money about 6 months ago. There's actually a really big, I got this teddy bear when I ended up going to the hospital because I didn't eat or drink any water for 9.5 days, so I started getting pretty close to death. And they ended up putting an IV in me, and I ended up holding out on that hunger strike, trying to raise as much money as possible for about 2 months. I didn't eat anything, and I was just on an IV, so it was really intense. And the nurses actually really liked what I was doing, or really liked me too, and they gave me this special teddy bear as a token of love and appreciation. So We called him the Sublation Teddy Bear. Sublation Bear for short.
You've definitely put a lot more work into this than I think that most people recognize or acknowledge. That's absolutely amazing. Golly, and your goal really is just to get more support, more following, build your community, get more people to hopefully again pass your test, to show that they understand the greater concepts that you guys are trying to tackle, and then hopefully, as a result of this, there's going to be success that people are going to achieve. Is that all correct?
Yeah, you get personal growth, personal satisfaction, but you also start engaging meaningfully in politics. Like if you like raise your highest potential in your individual spirit, but also spirit is like a plural. It's like your community spirit. So we're doing both at once. And that's the big thing about Hegel is you're actually always doing everything all at once. And if you look at all the Discord and all the Twitch debates, if you really think speculatively, if you think in this higher wisdom, all anybody's ever doing is they're talking about opposite pairs and then polarizing on opposites and trying to win in an abstract way. So the discussions are all resolved already if you know how to think about them right. And so what I thought I would do is I would sort of start showing the power of this by actually, this was an idea given to me. These young guys were listening to what I was saying, like, wow, this is pretty powerful. I don't really understand all that they said, but you need to go into these debates and talk to Destiny. You need to talk to these people who have like 800,000 people because they will grill you and it will bring out your message because I'm able to hold my own on literally every single topic because Hegel sublated all of them. So whether it's politics, whether it's gender, whether it's ontology, epistemology, I just did this amazing debate with Kai, this guy named Kai in the politics tab of Twitch. And he's not as big as Destiny, but he's really sharp. Like, incredible. And I got in there and he actually decided to debate me. And I'm more about sublating, not debating, but he came into debate. And the way he danced around, I'm like, who is this guy? He went from homelessness and practical spirit to like ontology to epistemology to anarchy to politics. He was jumping all over the place. And unless you have that structured thinking, that whole totality of thinking, you could never keep up with that guy. Like whatever education he has is really extraordinary. But if it wasn't for Hegel, I probably wouldn't have made it through. But I did. I had an answer for every single question he had. And I had an answer that was an answer that hasn't been heard before. So a lot of times when people are hearing my answer, they don't really know how to debate me or negate me because they're not even sure what I said. Because it's not fitting that box of just, warring on two opposites. I'm coming from a transcendental place of wisdom that exceeds, that is a breakthrough moment on those dialectics. And only Hegel sort of teaches you how to do that systematically in a scientific way. And so I'm very confident now that I can basically go into a lot of these debates and start sublating all these tensions relatively quickly. But these young guys were saying, you need to talk to the big audiences. And if he said, even if you talk to Destiny once, you could get like hundreds of thousands of people. And I'm like, yeah, I know. That's the kind of, that's the kind of growth that explosive that happens when you're in that right spirit. So that's kind of how I got into it. And we're still looking for people to debate, but I'm actually going to finish the Sessions of Spirit. I got one more to do. We're going to unite all the philosophers in the world. And technically, everybody's a philosopher. They just don't realize it yet. And once I get this course done, I'm going to start teaching another course. But I'm going to get the wisdom quiz kind of set up a little bit more firmly and get at least one or two people to help me start marking them in case we start getting more and more people coming in. And then we'll have a little bit of a process that's a little more fluid. And then maybe in the last week of September here, or last week of August, I'm going to go on Twitch and I'm just going to debate every single person in that politics tab. And then maybe go to Discord and just sit in there and just like talk to anybody who will chat. And then hopefully a critical mass will happen after 7 days of 15 hours a day. And then maybe somebody will say, maybe Destiny will notice, or somebody will know Destiny or one of these other streamers. And then we'll get like a big boost at the end of that. And that's where the revolution, the peaceful revolution, will start to take off, perhaps. If I win, if I actually, sublate instead of negate in those debates, if I do a good job, that will happen, which has been happening so far.
Interesting. Gee willikers. There are a lot of different people that you can talk to. The most important thing is finding potentially your topic that you want to talk about. You can't just hope to talk to an individual and have it hopefully generate a result, because frankly it very rarely is that easy. But it is beneficial to try to talk to individuals. If you do want to talk to an individual like Destiny, I'm sure that I think if you subscribe to his thing and then go into his Discord, he does a viewer call-in thing at some point. There's different ways to do that, but really you need to find a topic and then participate in an interesting conversation, and then people will chat with you about that thing. Um, what are your? You say you want to participate in debates. You want to have these types of conversations. What are your topics of choice?
Well, that's the thing is Hegel's Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences does it all. So it can be any topic: politics, economics, sociology, psychology, trauma, therapy, friendship, love, like all the life areas, basically anything physical, mental, academic, spiritual, family, friends, politics, finances, style, even beauty, fashion, dream goals, purpose, spiritual, all that stuff is now logically sublated. So that's why it actually doesn't matter. Like, it gives you the power to idealize anybody. And when I mean idealize, I mean bring the goodness out of them. Instead of just negate them and bring their limit out and try and crush them, you can actually just look for the truth in them and then pull it out. And if you know how to speak with these universals, it actually calls to the spirit, it calls to the goodness in people, and it causes our human nature to find its truth as genuine reason rather than our animal carnality, which is particularity, right? So that's what starts happening. And it's almost like anybody you come across, that's what's happening to me now. Is like anybody I come across, I can just recognize the amazingness of them. And so, like, I was going to ask you, who's your favorite philosopher? What's your goals? What would your topic be? And then see if we can bring the goodness in that too, because you're doing it to me, but you have your own channel too. And you seem to be a little bit philosophical yourself, because at the debate panel, I really liked what you said, the one that we were on.
Oh wow, everybody's muted to me. There's a lot of similarities in the thought patterns between the Bohme dialogue and what Dr. David Bohme was trying to do, and the concepts of polysemy and what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that that may be part of the reason why we have been driven to collide with one another in this way. I've been playing around in the Twitch space for a bit of a while now, and doing a variety of different things, and playing the online marketing game in my own way. And I've kind of been put into this space from somewhat similar avenues as what yourself has been pushed into this place. But also from a little bit different perspective. I've spent a lot of time with Queen Alexa on the political shit show. I've known Wick for quite a while. Done the Dylan Bird's Hippy Dippy podcast thing, and hung out with Prime Kais for a while. I would recommend that you go and interact there on Prime Kais on occasion from a time to time. Um, but yeah, I've played my own little games philosophically in the Twitch space, which is why we have the SomeBuddyOnline name, and why you will often find that I'm a little bit more apprehensive to place the concept on the table for inspection, because street epistemology has taught me the folly of proposing anything. But on the other hand, to analyze and seek the truth in any situation that seems to occur. Again, there's this amazing thing that seems to happen with the way that we try to describe the reality around us, and in the way that it seems to break down in the translation of a lot of these messages. And it seems to cause a lot of tension for people. And the ultimate goal is to try to alleviate that pressure by, I don't want to say distracting, but emphasizing the alternatives.
Interesting. I love it. David Bohm, I actually have him in the synchronicity document already because you're the second person. I studied him when I was young. I love his holographic theory, right? Uh, in fact, that's kind of a little bit how Hegel, I think, sees the soul, is that the total of everything is already in you because every part of a hologram has the whole in it, right? And I mean, we added him because these other people are really intense about it. And he wasn't that famous of a philosopher or scientist, right? Because he was so out there that people didn't know how to really engage with him. It sounded very mystical. But when I read him, I thought it was pretty impressive. And so he's got his own column in the synchronicity document. We're trying to align his concepts with Hegel's. And this one you just said here, polysemy, and it says here the coexistence of many possible meanings for a word or phrase. That sounds very much like the sensuous version of speculative thinking, because our languages become speculative because the logic underneath them is also this speculative simultaneity that's happening. And I don't know if I'm doing a good job explaining his version. Am I getting close to it, or what would you say?
So, I mean, that's fairly accurate, and I don't like to speak too much for David Bohm or tie polysemy to him as a concept. That's something that I found somewhere else, and it just seemed to travel down an orthogonal thought pattern. So it was a good tool to use, but polysemy, at least personal definition, the idea or concept of an individual word or idea having multiple different meanings to multiple different individuals simultaneously, or different meanings to the same person at different times, or sometimes different meanings to the same person at the same time. And words kind of move very far, and the words that an individual chooses to use to describe a situation will bring a lot of additional weight and merit into a situation, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to always be aware of the word choice that we're using, not only on an individual level, but the word choice that other people are using when they're describing situations to us, because they are trying to invoke some sort of emotional response from us through their word choice. So anyway, that's anyway the concept of polysemy. Bohme and his idea of the Bohme dialogue is an attempt to create a freely flowing group dialogue in which mutual understanding is attempted to be achieved by everyone simultaneously, non-judgmentally, so that once the perspective of an individual is completely elucidated, the other people can hopefully show with them or share them additional perspectives to widen their worldview, so that they are hopefully able to overcome the hurdles that they're not able to understand the particular blind spots they may have.
Very beautiful. I actually didn't know that he had that part of his dialogue. I was more, I guess, into the physics of it.
Yeah, he did,
Because
again, focus on physics very heavily, but then he went through a very interesting phase toward the later end of his career and focused a lot on sociology and, again, this kind of goal of getting all of the scientists together to build this gigantic group dialogue that might be able to achieve the true enlightenment through greater thinking. And he did a lot of work toward it until his unfortunate demise.
I'm not sure what happened in his demise. I'm just updating the document now while I'm chatting
Just a
with you
little old man being a
because
little old man and dying of little old
there's
age.
so much abundance that happens. Like when you're willing to go,
What was that?
that's not so bad. Um, I'm just adding to his column now that you called it the Bohm dialogue.
interviews with people like the Dalai Lama, and he's done interviews with a number of other great thinkers and speakers and scientists and things like that, just on the concept of discourse and dialogic learning in general.
Yeah, because I have here for anybody who's interested in David Bohm. I just like going into people's worlds because it's interesting. But I already have here implicate explicate order, and I put that in there because I was surprised that he grasped that dialectic right, and that's actually critical. And I was really surprised that he hit on that because I remember reading Bohm like years ago, probably 10 years ago, and I don't remember that coming up, but it plays a big role in when you're communicating. If the totality is always present, oh, it actually really makes sense now. If the totality is always present, then it's always got to be either an explicit form or implicit form. And you can get to 100% explicit form, but then it's got to somehow restart itself. And then maybe it's 100% implicit form, and then what we consider determinate reality is like the alternating between those two. And that's kind of, if you're interested in that in that Bohm dialogue, I think that the parallel to that in Hegel's philosophy would be the science of logic, because it's the pure thought categories thinking themselves in their objective perfect definitions. So it gives you a way to define all these fundamental words in crystal clarity the same way in every context. That's why he calls them universals. So if I asked you right now, actually, let's do a little kind of experiment. You are hyper aware of language, and you're quite a great speaker. If I asked you, what's the difference between being, something, thing, and object? What's the difference between those? Being, something, thing, and then object.
Consciousness or self-determination, self-motivation, self-awareness is the direction that I want to go down.
Does Bohm say anything about those words?
I couldn't tell you in particular. I don't have like a photographic reference to what he may or may not have said, but it wouldn't surprise me that he did. But no, not directly to my memory at the moment.
Yeah, because when we speak with these really fundamental words, usually we mean the same thing, right? Well, thing and something are the same thing, aren't they? Or an object and a thing. You're talking about the same thing, right? And like, being, I guess they're all beings. So somehow being and thing are the same thing. We never think that these are actually radically different categories logically. And like for example, between thing, like when thing has to grow itself. It's not a thing of something. This is not a thing in the world. This is like just the pure concept of thingness grows into itself. It's hard to think about because we never think critically enough about ourselves to question our own thought categories, right? That's why you have to be a real philosopher to do this kind of work. But between the thing coming on the scene and the object are hundreds of pages of difference that Hegel outlines. And it just expands your mind. Like you become hyper precise with your language. And that's why this David dialogue or Bohm dialogue is really intriguing to me. But if that's the goal that you have, and you see the philosophical importance to it, because we're all saying the same thing, but talking past each other. It's like the only thing that's tearing our species apart and unable to address climate change and the sixth mass extinction that seems to be unfolding, if the icebergs and the bees and all these extinctions are any indication, is literally the fact that we can't cooperate with each other. I think David Attenborough and the United Nations and all these people, they said the greatest threat to humankind is not climate change or Ukraine or Russia or even nuclear war. They're saying the greatest threat to humankind is that they just can't coordinate and cooperate with each other. And it's just language. It's logic, language. It's the soft, squishy stuff in here that's the problem of human beings. So I'm really intrigued by that,
the issue that myself and or David Bohm might come across with Hegel in his difference between thing and object is the issue that I come across as far as absolute truth with other individuals frequently. There are people that will try to choose a definition for a particular term and then try to use this definition universally across all fields. And it does sound like Hegel was doing a very good job of creating an effective handbook that does span across all fields to create some sort of universal terminology, vocabulary, or glossary that can be used for higher level thinking that bridges these different fields. But at some point, Bohme is going to say that this becomes extremely restrictive because now we're creating very rigid categories and strata by which knowledge has to be passed through, and we are handicapping ourselves, stopping any rhizomatic thought from being able to form and fill into these gaps. And we need to enable this group of people to be understood or to try to make themselves understood so that hopefully this group shared understanding can be achieved. So I'm apprehensive ever to try to define what the difference between a thing and an object and a being and a something are, because frankly, in what context do you mean? Because it can vary greatly.
Not in the universal context, but the rhizomatic. Like, are you a philosopher professionally? Like, how do you know all these things? It's like, what are you doing hiding out on Discord?
I hang out in Twitch. I am an autodidactic learner. I practice the rhetorical art and like to chat with folks. I went to school for anthropology and then went into business for myself and became an entrepreneur.
Wow, that's quite the transition. But the diversity is really refreshing to me. And rhizomatic, that's who used that one? Was that Deleuze, or who said that one?
Well, I stole it from my friend Kid Not Kin on Twitch, who probably stole it from Rhizome, because he's a big fan of
Okay.
rhizomatic thought. But all of these ideas tend to float around the space at some point and get lodged into the philosophy part of the brain, and then you do a little bit of studying until it smooths out all of the jagged parts.
Yeah, somebody passed me one of his videos already, and I saw the comparison between these universals and this sort of like non-universal way of speaking. And I think the rhizomatic moment happens in sensuous nature, where it's all kind of like contingent and it's all sort of kind of has a little bit of randomness to it, which gives it this freedom, this caprice to do what it wants. And so that's where the rhizomatic moment comes in, but it creates kind of a chaos. It's a diversity in the unity. And so this kind of other universal logic is the unity that structures this sort of chaos into rational structures that can be communicated at all. And I think that you need this hyper unity and this hyper individuality happening at the same time. And when you see them clearly, you get the best of both worlds. So you can actually, because these are true universals, they have no particularity, no sensuous, no color, no nothing to them. They just have order. And then when you use them in the world, they come in an infinite amount of varieties, different colors, different ways of talking, different languages, tons of different entry points. But I think that without some kind of universal systematic language, reason doesn't make sense at all. And I think we have to have both moments. I think we have to have that sort of randomness, and we sort of have to have these universals to grasp the full truth. And I think if we want to communicate in an efficacious way, we do have to have some kind of base definition of root words. And these words are base words like object and thing and something. We usually use them in synonymous ways. But if we use them in this more precise way, we can disagree on maybe what they mean. But I think if we do create a separation, we should be able to define why we're using different words in the first place. And I think that the thing is a more abstract category than the object. The object only comes out as a rational structure. It's the first genuinely rational explicit structure. Maybe Bohme would call it, the first rational object. But pure being starts at the very beginning as the most abstract, is the most fundamental category of which all other categories are a form or a being. And then something comes about 4 stages after with its other. And then thing comes about 10, 15 chapters later. And then the object comes towards the end. And he says that pure thought is developing itself along these categories. And he says you can't define one category with just one other category. You actually have to have the whole delineation, because every word requires you to define it with more words. So in the end, you end up getting to a bottom where eventually there has to be a root word grounding all the other words, or else the definitions aren't anchored on anything. And Hegel says, I think that's exactly what's missing, is that we have reason in the world, but it's wishy-washy, and it's not really scientific language. It's just approximating it.
Okay, well, you found the bottom of the hole. Now we get to radical anti-centrism. The fact that you can build any sort of rationale, you can take any sort of logical structure, and you start taking all of these components, and you start assembling your argument, so to speak, until you have this, this rationale that you have built, so to speak. But if you go all the way down to the foundations of any rationale, you're going to find like this mushy gray area where all of these fundamentals kind of start to fall apart and quit working at some point. And you'll find out that this direction that you're going in, as long as you're looking at the middle of the structure and like following the path of it, it's functional and it works. But if you ever like zoom out far enough and look at the entire thing, it's inherently a paradox. And that's kind of the issue with these fundamentals. Nothing is ever really built on anything except for a couple of assumptions, and then 20 assumptions later we can start building a foundation.
That's like the most perfect way somebody could say that. It's actually right. How do we solve that problem? What if the foundation that's mushy, the assumptions, what if the assumption we begin with is just the cancellation of those assumptions? What if we start with a presupposition that is no presupposition? So let's say we just do a Descartes move, and I've said this in other interviews so far, but I'm saying it in different contexts. So hopefully people still find how universal it is. I'm just doing the same thing, and people that are following along will notice that it's truly universal. And what if we say, okay, fine, we can't trust any of our words, any of this rhizomatic development, or any universals we even think we know. Cancel them all, negate them all, and then what do you get left with? You get left with just the pure I thinking itself, according to Descartes. So he says the only thing you can be certain of is I think, therefore I am, right? But is that really the most fundamental thing that we can know? Well, Hegel comes along and says, actually, the most fundamental thing can't have any mediation in it. But the thinking I has to have more than one part to be moving, to be thinking, right? So he says there's an implicit assumption in the pure I that Descartes doesn't want you to think about, or Descartes doesn't want you to think about. Hegel says you have to negate that too to get to the true foundation that isn't this wishy-washiness. He says if you cancel the self, then you end up canceling nature, you end up canceling everything you think you know, including all the categories that you think you have in your head. And he says what you end up with was just pure canceling in this void of nothingness where everything is canceled. And then you cancel that canceling. Well, you don't cancel it, it cancels itself because it's just pure canceling. So once it cancels itself, it drives itself into less than nothingness because it can't become something. It can't become something more than canceling. But the canceling of that canceling leads into an affirmative that it's something opposite to pure nothing, but it can't be something more than pure nothing because then you're introducing something from outside. So it becomes a sheer indeterminate immediacy. There's nothing, it's so little, there's nothing to compare it with, so you can't say what it is. It's like the Tao, it's like the ineffable moment. What if you made that the beginning? What if that's the presupposition, that's no presupposition, that's the only stable thing that isn't wishy-washy? And that's exactly what Hegel says. That's the only beginning that's truly universal, the only one. And he says, you try and do anything other than what I just did, he says, you're doing something more than nothing, which means you're making a greater assumption. And I was just like, when I first grasped that, that took me about probably around 2,000 hours. Around 2,000 hours, I finally grasped that. my mind just opened. I was just like, oh my goodness. First of all, I thought Descartes had the answer, right? So when he negated Descartes, I was like, how's that? And then when I caught the beginning, it shifts the tectonic plates in you because you can't think your way out of that. It's so clear. I don't know how you can make that wishy-washy, you know? If you try and do anything less than that, you end up in something that can't be communicated at all. It's not worth knowing, right? It's like, okay, maybe you can say something totally irrational, but then how is that useful in any kind of way? You know, I don't even think you can start with that even, because then it doesn't explain anything here. You can say, well, all this is an illusion. Okay, well, it's still here. Explain the illusion then. It's it's just so fundamental. And I thought, well, what if I propose that to you? Have you even heard that answer before? And what do you think? Is that the true beginning? That's what Hegel calls pure being. That's the first category. And then that turns into pure nothing. And he just builds all the categories from that. And it's just, wow.
So you got me again to the bottom of it all. The only axiom that I like to share with people, because it's the only thing that I feel is really truly defensible, is that people should be beaten up for stating their beliefs. And I think that when we get down to that deep down core fundamental level, and we are making that primary necessary assumption that you can't necessarily go beyond, immediately after that, everything becomes incommunicable to anyone else, and it becomes an entirely internal intellectual journey that you are going on for self-actualization, where we are striving toward attaining like some sort of like Buddhist nirvana. And we are no longer striving for shared understanding with other people or even really expressing an idea to someone else, as opposed to seeking that spiritual oneness that leads to the tranquility that is transcendence.
Whoa. Okay. You've done some homework here. Wow. I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, that's what's surprising. Two things are happening in my head when you're saying that now. What if this pure being, are you trying to say this pure being as it develops itself is going inwards and it is this Buddhist meditative transcendence, or are you saying that is not what it is?
I'm saying that once you attain that state, it's impossible then to take it and put it onto paper and then transfer it to someone else.
Okay. You're technically right if you stay just in that first moment. But he says how this logic starts up is when you're not there really. Like if you really cancel everything, it's just the pure thoughts thinking themselves. So pure, not pure, I guess, being by its own inner necessity, its inwardness, its content turns into pure nothing. But then when it tries to know pure nothing, it just turns back into pure being because you can't hold pure nothing there. It just immediately negates itself back into its opposite. And then this realization that there's two things, not just one thing. In the beginning, pure being and pure nothing are the same thing, but different. It's a distinction that is no distinction. And you're like, are we talking Buddhist koans here? Like, what the heck is this? He says, this is what speculative thought is. This is like policing me times, 1,000 or something. You do this movement, and then you realize that there's two things there, and that's becoming. This ceaseless back and forth is becoming, pure becoming. And then pure becoming recognizes that it has two orientations at two moments, and then they lock themselves, they cancel themselves, and they become a stable nothing that then negates itself into another being. But this being now is being mediated by this collapse of the two moments, and that's the first stable thought you can have. And it's an inward thought. All this development is happening inwardly, he says. And he says this is what the Buddhists are trying to do, but they stop at the pure something. He says as far as you can get with the meditation without thinking, he says you can get from determinate being with quality, or the first notion of reality. It goes inwards into the pure something. But that space between the pure something and determinate being in general, this space between them, this is what he calls the nothingness that is the being within self. And he says that's what the Buddhists are feeling intuitively. And it's all inward. But you can, once you understand it inwardly, you can explicate it, which is what he's doing in his Science of Logic. He says this is the inward world that people are feeling when they're mystically enlightened, but they can't articulate it because they don't understand the system of the universals enough to bring them into language. And so that's why the difference between philosophy to Hegel and religious consciousness is that religious consciousness can't think the universals. They can only be them and then use particular examples to make metaphors of it, which is why it gets really kind of sloppy and why divine texts, even though they're divine, can be interpreted in so many ways that it loses the essence, And he says philosophers are doing the same thing as the mystics in those texts, except they're putting it in pure thought in that systematic way, the true divine order of truth, I guess you could say, in the chaos, in the infinite variety of nature. So you get both worlds in their perfection, their ideality, perfect diversity and perfect essence. And I'm just like, he just like synthesized modern science with Buddhism, with the Tao, with Wittgenstein, with like Descartes, with like everybody. It's just like, holy crap, man. There's like 115 philosophies in his one science of logic. And I'm like, how come nobody's ever taught it this way before? Like the way Hegel came across my path, he came across my path twice before I finally got it. And the way that people teach him is so boring. Like what I just said to you, I've never read anywhere before, right? It's like nobody even got close to this kind of like true abundance of the guy. He did his homework. He didn't publish a single paper until he was 37, which is like ancient. But anyway, I really appreciate your comment, because the fact that you are an anthropologist or you have that background, I think you appreciate the paradoxes of language and understanding. And I really just appreciate you saying that, because it's resonating with me. And I'm very curious about you now, because you are a bit of well, you're wearing glasses and a hat on like Discord, so you're a bit of an anomaly, which I think is really awesome. So I don't know how much more I should blab. We're at the top of the hour. How do you feel?
No, it's completely acceptable and appropriate. Everything is good. A friend of mine that you've had an opportunity to meet, Saxon, looks like he's in the waiting room and like to join us. I'd like to also give an opportunity
Sure.
to the audience if anybody out there would like to join us. We were hoping to have Sinaticus join us. He has a new name that he's using, but I guess there was a miscommunication about time. He may be joining us at some point. We'll keep our fingers crossed in that regard. But I do like talking about this general concept. Initially, when we first started diving into the Twitch channel, we were exploring the muse and the personal passion, the thing that motivates an individual to get out of bed, to create something, and then to want to share that thing with the world, because there is some essence of the self that is brought into the creation of the thing, whatever it is that we're creating. If it's a painting that you're making, if it's a poem that you're making, if it's a doctoral dissertation, if it's a new chemical compound that you're trying to develop, there is at some point some level of the self that is being, I don't want to say burned, but invested into creating this thing. And this has been a huge motivating factor in my quest here in the Twitch space to find that personal passion, that thing that drives individuals to create the goodness. And I want to be here to catalog it, to collect it, and to point people toward it, because I do feel like that is the thing that is lacking nowadays, is people are constantly receiving and never creating. And everybody needs to take an opportunity to create something, even if it is some finger paints or if you're making a silly noise with your mouth, but you need to create something and you need to share it with someone. It's an essential part of human interaction. But like I'm saying, let me go ahead and bring friend Saxon in right quick.
Sure.
Greetings, friend Saxon. You are live
Aloha.
on Twitch and on Facebook and on YouTube and on every other platform imaginable. Welcome. Thank you for introducing me to my friend Spiritman, and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Well, hello there, sir. I remember our last engagement was quite enjoyable.
Oh, good. Oh, good. I like when that happens.
So, Saxon, I don't know if you've been following us at all. We've been talking about Hegel. We've been talking about Bohme. We've been talking about the Tao. We've been talking about Buddhism, the spirit, the self, Descartes, and the muse, and the idea that we are trying to find this thing And then essentially, I want to say better society with it.
Mm-hmm. It was my understanding there would be no math involved in this in this story. I'm not particularly. It's a bit late here in the London zone, and I apologize. Give you a couple of moments to sort of come up to speed a little bit, because I haven't been watching the stream very much, so I just kind of
No,
pop by and.
entirely appropriate. Thank you for coming by, Saxon. We always appreciate your perspective and anything that you may have to add to it. Was that an accurate description and synopsis so far, Spiritman, of kind of what we've talked about generally speaking?
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised. You have a really incredible memory, actually, and it's so fluid. So yeah, the rabbit hole has gotten quite deep, and musing is quite a apt way of describing that. So yes, I think we're definitely going to allow you to have some time to catch up, because what just happened, I don't think has happened quite this way before. So we're in new territory, I think. So ask some questions. If you need to orientate yourself, take the time you need. But yeah, I think that was a good way to sum it up. Does that make sense?
So
What's the new territory?
Well, the new territory is that there's this kind of super sensuous world that we're not really in touch with. And we start thinking about it in this way that Hegel was talking about it, in a scientific way. The mysticism of like the last 3,000 years, that all these divine teachers and these guys that really, and these women that really felt like they were tapped into something deeper. They weren't just making it up. They weren't just charlatans. They could do this for decades, you know? It just makes people think there's something more going on, but they couldn't explicate it in a scientific way that we could actually investigate. And so what we just did here in the last hour or so is we built a little bit of a starting point that was stable enough to kind of get into this world through Bohme and kind of his Bohme dialogues, where he realized that we need to have some kind of universal language where we can start communicating properly. And so anyway, we sort of got down this rabbit hole in the supersensuous realm of pure thought. And then we sort of discovered that somehow, I did it through Hegel, somehow somebody here figured it out for himself, or he's really recognizing this starting point has to be this paradoxical ineffability that starts speaking itself. And it's inside of us. We are these categories. Like, it is on us. This infinite thing is in us. So in sensuous reality, when we don't realize the totality of it, it comes through us with this impulse to want to create and want to share that with something else that's equally as conscious as us. There's something necessary about that in order to have a fulfilling experience here. And so this rabbit hole is leading back from the supersensuous back into the natural world, where we as finite beings actually exist and conflict with each other and are trying to make some kind of meaning out of the like craze that just befell us with this pandemic, right? It woke us up a bit. And it's like, well, what is the purpose of all this? You know, what are we supposed to create? Are we supposed to help people? How do we even help people? If I want to share, who do I share with? And is Facebook the one allowed to say is the arbiter of who I'm allowed to share with and who I'm not? And like we talked about earlier, this peaceful revolution I'm trying to get going, based on this sort of pretty intense mystical scientific rabbit hole, seems to not be making its way into the public consciousness, despite spending massive amounts of money and making tremendous, unusual sacrifices in the most intelligent way that I can as an activist over 10 years. So now it's kind of like, what do we do to get this higher expression of this, this feeling that we need to explicate the ineffable? How do we get this to be our more ideal experience in the world? I think it's the wisdom quiz in this peaceful revolution idea in the app. But maybe you have a different approach, or maybe you think we should be doing something different, Saxon?
Well, the one thing I think that we should be doing is try to use the word we less, because there's so many people to try to think that there's a we that's not the three people here that we're talking about, But whenever someone says we should do this, I think actually that's a great idea, and you should do it because I'd maybe love to do it, but I'm like busy on that day, and so the general plea for the we, I think, is something that, as an exercise, to just change it up a tiny bit to think about who the we is. Because in a marketing context, if you don't know who the we is, or the they is, or that's the other thing, because the other side of the we is the they, and there's always the they, and the we all the way home. And I'm like, if we don't know who we are and who they are, then it really is just a finger wagging exercise in a way of we should be doing this. And now is the time to be doing this. And I'm like, well, I think that a bit of the we is that a person really wants to feel that they are part of whatever that is. And that there's like a tacit inclusionness, so a person can feel like I'm part of the we who should be doing this, even if you don't really have much more than just saying that you're part of it. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not judging anyone or anything, but definitely I find a practice of just even trying for an hour in conversation to not use the word we or they. And in terms of computer programming, you can't have variables that are just they. They all have to be declared of who they actually are to reference the right thing. And yeah.
This actually brings up a very interesting topic. I met with Universal Discourse, who is another Twitch streamer who's done some work with quantum physics and with sociology and with anthropology. Very intelligent. I believe that she has her PhD. But she practices a practice without pronouns. So it's very important that when one introduces concepts to the praxis, that they are not referencing the I, the you, the we, the they, because all of these terms are very potentially dangerous, and it does put you in a very interesting, precarious position when it is time to present the concept and we need to explain the injustices against the individual. Oh, wait, that's a pronoun. Darn it! So figure out how to say what it is that you need to say, because it's a little harder than you might think.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of people think that we're not using we enough because we're using too much individuality and the I. And maybe if we don't use the I or the we or any identifiers, then maybe we shouldn't say anything at all. And we sort of end up in this kind of world where, because the labels aren't clear and they're oppressing us, that we should just do away with them entirely and just get rid of everything. But that doesn't seem to be the point of being here. The point of being here seems to be to explicate things. And even if it's messy and we're creating with, a couple of different paints and creating different colors, and it's something new that we don't really know how to understand, it's still worth carrying with to figure it out, to actualize the truth that might be in that process. And I absolutely agree that the way we're using labels is a little bit sloppy. And the sloppiness doesn't mean we should get rid of the labels. I think the sloppiness can be clarified into the essence of what the words truly mean or how we want to mean them. So with the pronoun discussion, right now in the Peaceful Revolution, there's two interesting things going on. And maybe I won't bring you guys as a we into it yet. But there's a woman I'm talking to who's very intelligent. And she's very traditional. Man, woman, none of this other confusing stuff. People have mental illness. Negates them. And then there's the other side, who are the non-binary, the fluid, the guys that go to orgies, all this kind of awesome stuff. I'm actually talking to Alexander Bard right now. Somebody got inspired and they put me in touch with his intellectual deep web Google group. And I'm actually talking with him. But he's very sexually free and all this stuff and very open about it. So we got two different worlds here.
Great to see you, bud. We got
and they're warring with each other. And Jordan Peterson is kind of caught in the fray, you know?
Caught.
And I think, well, what's the middle? Like, what's the...
Caught in the fray. Just like he's caught in it.
Well,
he enjoys being in that web, I think.
Well, I look at him now, and I think he kind of thinks he should have went about it a little different, but his premise is still true. I think he still believes his premise because it is quite sublative. It's just that his presentation makes him look one-sided. So he's not really against pronouns. He's just against the power maneuvering of it. Because the people who are feeling marginalized in the community, in the current global community, they're trying to overcompensate by saying, I don't feel powerful, so I'm going to use these pronouns to overwhelm you cognitively or create as many identities as I can to make my presence known. And I think that there's a little bit of truth to that because we can do that with any language. You can create a new religion with 1,000 new words, and then if you force your membership to memorize every single one, then it really does take up real resources, right? But I think
I'm
that
loving it.
there does need to be more freedom, though. So I think the real sublation of these two opposite worlds and this language conflict to make words useful but not oppressive is if we use this sort of triadic structure, this thesis, antithesis, synthesis, but in a living syllogism, then you have to have four positions in any language game you play, whether it's pronouns or whatever. If you leave those four positions open, then you are having the full abundant freedom of any conversation that can lead anywhere you want. For the people that are thinking it's a power game in the pronoun game, all they have to do is say, okay, there's four orientations. I can handle four. Four is okay. But for the people that want freedom, they might think, well, that's oppressive. Now you're just going to their side because I'm non-binary. I have an infinite amount of identities. But the secret is that the fourth position captures that because that's the transcendental point. So you have the first male, let's say, second is female, the middle ground is bisexual or androgynous or in between. And then there's the fourth point, which is really hard to get at. And that's sort of like non-binary. But it's the gateway to, if somebody wants to know more about your identity, you can fly all over the universe because that's the connection to the totality. So as long as you do those four, you get the best of the fluid-free, gender-free individuals. But you also don't have this restriction on the other side where you're overwhelming people. So you get the total freedom and you also get the cogency at the same time. And I think if we use words that way, you get this incredible clarity that can lead us towards synthesizing opposites that are never going to come together, whether it's the we and the they or the pronouns and the conservatives or whatever it is. I think this is the fundamental structure that if you do it right in this syllogism, we can speak about we's, we can speak about they's, and still have harmony because we're just creating determinations and distinctions that is accurate and truthful knowledge that makes life worth living beyond just pure intuition. That's what makes us different from animals or less conscious forms, is that spirit is supposed to be the truth of human nature as thinking our soul, if you're atheistic, thinking our subconscious, or if you're a Bohme scholar, thinking the holographic universe through yourself so you can experience it for yourself. And that's sort of what the muse is, I think, in different words. Somebody is, I really like how you said that. It's not just you're supposed to do that and then share it with people so that you get a reflection of it too. It's extra enjoyable. So I kind of agree with you 100% there, Saxon. But I wonder what you think of this being a sort of solution to that problem. And would you want to become a we with me based on that?
That's the kind of we, for sure. I was more speaking about the generic, non-philosophical discourse of the use of we and the aspects of it's not just the rhetorical flourish of we, but it's almost like an advertising marketing-ism of we. But I agree with what you're saying about the real use or the more, I don't want to use the word precise use of words, but something where you're not just being loosey-goosey all the time, to be able to attach an adjective or an adverb to a phrase or something, to be able to be more clear. And so the word we, as an example, is something that I guess oh geez, I wish it wasn't so late. There's a good thought in there. It's essentially that having a slightly more rigorous precision in language, certainly goes so much further in being able to have people implicitly understand each other and to sort of have as a lubricant for discussion. So many people in the sort of general philosophy discussion worlds just don't want to get to answers. That's what I've really learned in this space. People, well, wanting or whatever, don't seem to have the tools at all to even want to have an actual discussion. And so the whole Bohmium, you know, it was only, if anything, just a tiny bit of a like, hey, here's an idea of some different way that you, the person I was talking with, could possibly actually just try. But today I actually heard people talking about Bohme, saying, oh, I hear it all over the place. And I'm like, oh, well, it's interesting. Because I don't think I heard it anywhere until I uttered it. But it was being used as a slur. It was, oh, those Bohme people. Bah. Oh, by the way, I've got some good news, buddy. There's one new person at the Mr. Girl server today.
Oh, who is the new person that you met?
No, I am the new person at the Mr. Girl server.
Oh my goodness! How did this
Yes,
get remedied? What happened here? Your ban has ended.
it all came together, just patience is a virtue, and to go out into the other out world and have a coming of age arc of experiencing all kinds of new and different things, and then to be able to really appreciate coming back to a place that one might call home, only to find it filled with degens.
Well, we'll have to discuss that more when we're not on Twitch.
Yes,
but,
I'm terribly sorry.
No. Let's see. As far as the individual, the self, becoming the self, sharing the self, trying to manifest the true and proper idea, share it with other individuals. I feel like when one really truly does manage to find a way to put it on paper, so to speak, to continue the same metaphor that I used, I feel like it is fairly viral. It's going to spread very heavily. In the Dawkins sense, it is going to be a very good meme, and people are going to want to experience it and to share it with other people. So how to say, to be able to put it on paper is the goal, but also is impossible in some way. But not truly impossible. There are people that do it all the time.
I think it's possible to do it, guys. And, I'm pushing the conversation in a certain way. And I think that you're very wise, Saxon, to pick up on the we thing. Because I start speaking in collectives, right? And sometimes I'm not aware of that because I'm such a bit of a communitarian that I also appreciate individuality. But when I'm talking, there's this sort of like, I don't know about you guys, but because this is being recorded, if it does get around, there's this understanding that language is going to make what it will of what we're saying, right? And because I'm really trying to create a movement for real, there's a sort of caution that now that I sort of understand the fabric and the logic of language, there's like whenever you see an abstraction, humor usually is created by a violation of something that's benign, something that's accepted. And then as long as you feel safe with somebody and it's truly benign, it's a benign violation. And that makes it okay to like laugh or violate somebody. But when you're in such a broad audience like what we have with the internet, that negation is going to be taken out of context, and then you create a big rift. And right now, I don't feel like I can really have that happen this early because there's not enough people, Saxon, sublating. And I don't know if you and I talked about it last time, but if we had to do a we and a they, I think the only real meaningful one that has a chance of creating a real unity that's not naive is if the we are the people that know how to sublate and the they are the people that so far only know how to negate. But the paradox here is that even though they look like a we and a they, the definition of sublation is actually the first negation with a second negation. So actually, the side that is the we already includes the they. It's just that the they don't realize it yet. And that's how it mediates and it transcends that divide while being in the distinction. So it's a useful way of saying, hey, look, there's something we have to agree on. But once we agree on it, you always were already part of it, just in an abstract way. So I think that if we make this sort of division based on that in this new peaceful revolution, then we don't get this us versus they, which is like, what Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy was talking about, where it's like you're always othering the other and they're the enemy, and then you use that to unite your people, and the division, the internal conflict, it goes away because you've got somebody external to hate. It's like Armageddon Day when the aliens came. All of a sudden, the human race was like, a clique. We don't need to do that. I agree with you, but I think the only concept that can transcend that is just the word sublation that nobody really understands. How convenient. So I really like that you picked up on that so quickly. And I don't know if you want to run with that, but I am trying to do these Twitch and these Discord broadcasts to try and inspire people that if you are any of these opposites, gay, straight, whatever, conservative, political, apolitical, communist, socialist, whatever the opposites are in our world that's dividing people, I want people to watch these talks. And even though I might be a little bit dry, I'm saying something that is hopefully transcending what they're seeing anywhere else on Twitch or Discord or on the international news or whatever. And I really hope that I wasn't really going against you. I was trying to illuminate that was a great point and there's a potential solution. So I don't know if you want to pick up on that and build on it, but I want to go somewhere, like I think there's a lot of people suffering that want something to happen. And I want to be that guy to say, hey, not only can I do something, but if we have the conversation in this sublative way, the amazingness in everybody can come out. And anyway, that comment was great. So I'll leave it at that and see what you guys want to do with it.
I was just going to ask about, I was just thinking about language and about constructed languages. I was trying to think of one, I think it's Lojban. Just trying to look it up here, but there's the ability to construct languages out of whole cloth. And, there's could be a way of creating there's philosophical languages I'm reading here on Wikipedia about, something that can have different language and it would be interesting. I think the sensitivity I have to we is that a lot of people will have a lot of finger wagging proclamations. Not yourself, but generally people are like, we should do this and we should do that. And I often say, well, the rain should fall up and not down because I like it better like that. But the reality is sometimes very difficult. But when people put a we should do this, it feels like it's doable just on the basis of, well, if everybody was getting into it. And I'm not not circling into what you're saying, but just generally dumb ideas, basically. That may be equally difficult or basically just impossible. So for the idea for humanity to eventually evolve a little bit more, progress a little bit more, to get past this point that in many ways, so many people's problem is that just they never realized that there was other people out there who were weird compared to them. But with the power of communication, the urgency of any crap between the ads media world of must put something out, people like being outraged, and all of it adds up to suddenly people are able to be outraged in whole new ways every day. An unending stream of potential for, oh my gosh, those people are, I thought we were all the same. We, especially of America, with 284 million adults, the largest, single block of people who think they're all the same. And Americans always have a sense of course, we're American. When actually there's a lot of different people, and that 280 million plus group, and then all the children and all of the differentness that people can in humanity have, or in America. There's like a huge swath of potential for people going, my God, those people are completely not my people, but they're American, so I should hate them, and maybe we'll have a civil war. And it's kind of like, well, wouldn't it be nice to have civil peace instead? That's too boring. So it is a difficult uphill climb for peace. I'm more of a waiter, and I'm happy, not a waiter, but I'm happy to wait. Patience is a virtue and all that. So, humanity is obviously progressing, and but the push for the continued progression, I think, is not bad. And at least it's something to do, and it's not regressive. So it feels very generative. So rather than being a degen, it's just kind of cool to be able to want to generate things as opposed to just degenerate them. I don't know what any of that really means, but I hope that it sounds somewhat cogent.
It feeds perfectly back into what I was saying again, that we need to be people that create, not people that look at things that other people have created and then try to destroy these things. We need to contribute to society and build as a whole. We need to be accepted for who we are, and then acknowledge the fact that we will be accepted when we do create things. A lot of the greatest creations in the world have been made by people that have been outside of the normal mainstream, and a lot of the best creations are going to continue to be created by people that are outside of the normal mainstream. That's kind of the inherent nature of creativity. And again, you need to use whatever it is that is unique in yourself and create some way of sharing that with other people. You need to manifest your uniqueness into some sort of art. And again, I don't mean learn how to paint, folks. I'm saying, like, figure out what it is that you enter your flow state in, create something, and then use that to contribute to the greater whole.
But if we have to talk about collective structures, like, let's say if we're going to try and fix this wealth concentration that's happening incredibly quickly, we do have to cooperate in some way. And how do you get this diversity of creation, this generation that's unique, but in a way where we're doing it all together? Because sharing has this kind of contradiction in it, that you are yourself, but you're also in unity with another. And if we're going to try and stop this incredible wealth concentration where like 30% of all wealth on earth is going to go into a hyper concentrated area, and we're already struggling, shouldn't we have some kind of impetus to want to do something together kind of quickly before maybe we reach a point where we might not be able to do something as efficaciously? And I don't know if you want to get into the super serious topics, but I kind of do. I have about, 18 days left technically before I have to take a pivot. So I'm trying to get as much going as possible for people that want some real answers. And you're right. I think you're absolutely right that on Twitch and Discord, there are people that are just venting because they're so frustrated and they don't have a way to get to a solution. So it's easier to just negate and criticize and, not really say anything affirmative so that you can't be degenerated, But I think that we have something that we could probably build upon that can withstand that and keep all the spectrums open, keep diversity open while having unity. Keep creativity open while having sameness. Keep all these things open in a wise way. But I think that, it is important to have a serious conversation about what are we actually going to do, and where's the best way to have that or best place to have that conversation, and who should we be having it with. And I don't know if your audience is super serious, somebody, but when I was talking to you last time, Saxon, you had some really intense sort of communist Catholic commentary going on, which I thought was super interesting, but we never got into it. It's like, don't know if you have the brain power to do that tonight, but I am kind of interested in building the conversation towards something that might result in and something that's exciting for the people watching, that we're going somewhere. We're the brave ones that are going to generate something worth degenerating. We're trying to anyway.
No hables anglaise, senor.
That does happen on occasion. And again,
That's Spanish. That's Spanish. That's Spanish for I don't speak English, which is basically I wish I could contribute better at this particular moment, but perhaps I will take a bit of a pass, as I feel like I should be actually probably checking out, but I'd love to have this conversation more when it's more of a awakened time here in the British zone for me. So before I actually just sort of fall off the screen in sleep, I should actually say I should get out of here. So because I don't think I'm making I think it's nice that I'm making some sense, which is kind of cool, but it's kind of random. So I will take my leave and say thank you for the very good conversation, and I look forward to being able to this up. So do hit me up on the clicking thingy, and we can go from there. Very cool.
I think that maybe we will use this opportunity. It has been a little while. I've been on here for almost 5 hours at this point. We'll end it for this evening. I'll give you an opportunity to give any last words, Spiritman. But maybe we will reschedule another conversation like this for the upcoming days when yourself and Saxon have some availability. We'll try to figure out a time that might work better for the time zone in the UK zone, so to speak. And I plan on doing a couple of daytime streams in the next couple of days or next week at some point. So we'll try to organize it for that time.
Yeah, I would love that. And if you want to bring somebody who's really like a strong negation, maybe the most degenerate of degenerates on here, maybe that's you actually, Saxon. I don't know. I don't feel that way, but
no. We could get Chud maybe.
I don't know if I have the pull power. I know a couple of degenerates. I mean, I could bring you Queen Alexa, but they're only so degenerated.
Well, we'll make the best of it, but I think if we had a really intense conversation that got to the root, I think the panel that we had last time was really kind of intense, and this is a pretty good opener, I think, in terms of picking up something and building something that's people can critique. Because I am saying something affirmative. We have quizzes, we have things you can attack and critique. There's a lot of meat here that can be sort of broken down and investigated to see if we've done our homework. But I am kind of excited to see if we can do something that hasn't been done before. And you guys are really pleasant and amazing, and I really appreciate you guys being some of the first people I met on Twitch and Discord. So I mean, I heard it could be a lot worse. So I feel like I've sort of gotten the gentle introduction into this world. But yes, I would love to make the most of it next time. Just let me know when, and we will sublate.
You sound like someone that needs to find Doobie's politics server, and I don't mean to throw you to the wolves or anything, but there are some dark corners of the internet. I'm sure you can find some places to get into some contentious conversations. I do, again, recommend Prime Kai's panels to you if you can find your way onto there. He does open panels pretty regularly. I don't know if you're in his Discord, but sit in the waiting room, meet with the mods. Eventually they'll pull you into a thing if they're live and pulling people into things, and you might have fun there. But anywho, it has been an absolute pleasure. I do look forward to chatting with you again in the near future. We'll try to schedule something for some time between now and then. But until then, do take good care of yourself, and I will see you around. Bye now. All right, folks, that was a lot of fun. We had a wonderful little chat with my good friend Spiritman, my other good friend Saxon. There was another person that was supposed to join us, but unfortunately, it appears that they were not available for whatever reason. It's been a wonderful and interesting night, I gotta tell you what. Tomorrow's another interesting day. I don't have anything scheduled for us here on stream tomorrow. I have something that is taking place in the IRL space that may require my time and attention, but I will try to come back, my dear friends. I have some videos that I want to try to share with you folks before we do Thursday's panel about police interactions and things like that. So maybe we'll watch some videos, and I want to play some video games maybe. I'm learning about how these things work. Apparently there's this platform on the internet that Amazon owns called Twitch or something, where people play video games on the internet and people watch them do that. And so maybe I'll play a video game on the internet and people will watch me do that. But then again, I need to decide whether or not that's something viable for me to even do. Maybe I'll make a different Twitch channel that I can do that kind of a thing on. But yeah, we're doing this stuff, we're doing that stuff. I want to do some police interaction stuff. I'm not sure where we're going to be tomorrow, but same time, same place. Dungeons and Dragons on Wednesday, and then of course on Thursday we've got our police interaction panel. Join the Discord if you guys want to find out about future panels and potentially get yourself onto it so that you guys can contribute what you think on the concepts and topics that we're trying to share. But from here, for now, I will see you folks around. We'll have another chat in the near future, I hope. Take care now. I'll get you rated out in a moment.